Hello, welcome back, everyone, to the closing session of our 2 day symposium on conserving culturally significant places in India. So, in the closing session, we hope to reflect on some of the issues that were raised over the 2 years, maybe share our ideas, and we would like our chairs for various panels during the 2 days to share their insights, what was done nicely, what was not included, what could be our further steps, etc. So I would pass it over to Dr. Parul Munjal, our division director, to lead this panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ria, and welcome back, everybody. A very good afternoon and morning to those who are in the UK. So we've had the privilege, I think, over these 2 days of listening to awesome presentations that brought in some, diverse perspectives to the table. And I really, really thank all the chairs, 20 of you all who have generously given your time and been a part of this. So now today, the idea is that having heard all these views, and of course, each of you being experts in your own domains, also in the field of conservation and archaeology and history, so whatever, and sociology. So it's all your expertise as well as what we heard being brought to the table. It would be great to now sort of sum it up and see what are the takeaways, what is the way forward that we can define, and if there are any particular directions we can take also, which can help us in reflecting on the charter. So these are, I think, the important things. So few points from each of the chairs, which can be, a guiding path for us in the future. So we could probably start from session 1 or the other way around. Either way, I suppose. From I think maybe the last session and then go back because Professor Menon, I don't think, has been able to join. And I also wanted to mention that Professor Arun Menon and Nirupama and Dr. Rima Huja have been unable to join due to certain circumstances at their ends. So we will probably start with the 10th session and then go backwards, maybe. So I think we'll go forward with Vishaka, sorry. We'll go forward with Divya and Praline, and yeah, start there.
So Divya goes first.
No, please, Pralin, you.
No, you can. Chalo. Okay, so I will very briefly, I'll try to be as brief as possible since, how many? 10, 20 have to be accommodated? Yeah, in half an hour.
We'll be 16, I think. Yeah.
16. Okay.
1 hour.
So okay, great. You got down to finally sort of looking at the charter and organizing this event. Great. One got to hear some really interesting things because I couldn't follow you yesterday, but then last evening, then I saw the recording and so one or two I thought were, and I have to mention them here. I thought those two young boys from Mumbai were just so right there, I mean, and sometimes I get very despondent, when having taught for 35, 40, whatever, 40 years in the discipline, that where are we heading? What are we, are we really making a difference? But then this next generation, like I saw hope there. I think it was Siam. And so I really want to, I heard them really. And I thought they had very, they were right there. In fact, there was a kind of maturity there, which maybe was lacking in many others. I mean, I have to be honest about that also. So I would just, that a very good effort there. I wish, okay, we could have read the papers because we just read the abstracts and so one could only react to that very limited, 10 minutes. So I don't even know. And I made that point in my feedback also that maybe, they've already included what one said in their papers. But what I felt was really, and maybe that is maybe when you organize the next symposium, because now we've got documentation, and that point I'm going to elaborate a little more also, that maybe the next symposium can be more on innovative proposals, so that we know where the profession is going towards, so that we don't just end up hearing, the same thing. And that's my major criticism, that the discourse hasn't really grown the way it should have. And I think this point Mr. Menon also made initially, that while fine at the global level we've moved from material heritage to value-based heritage to living heritage, but in India, I mean, the discourse hasn't really grown, and the same issues which we were talking about 40 years ago, 84, when I worked on the first project which INTACH did I wasn't even a conservation architect then. But at that time, there was a freshness to the whole thing. Now a staleness has crept in, it's the same thing, same issue we are hearing. Yes, urbanization, yes, that, yes, this, yeah. It's kind of, so maybe you should just focus on proposals which are kind of innovative and which can take I know it's a challenge, to sort of bring conservation into the mainstream, but so maybe that's one area, you should just focus. Let's not talk about any more. I mean, yes, documentation will be there for proposals, but keep it in the background or very sort of limited, and the focus needs to be on that. That's one. Number two, because you're also the IHA, you're also the Heritage Academy, and you also take courses. And this is where I come to teaching. And I'm, again, 40 years of teaching also. One is having to, again, introspect. I'm at that stage where I'm going to superannuate and whatever. So one is also introspecting that, what have we done something? Have we made a difference on the ground? And I feel no, we haven't. I mean, I'll be very honest that the way, again, the profession needed to be 40 years, is a long time. We are not where we were. Some of them people might differ. People might say, no, it has grown. But I personally feel, no, it hasn't. And I think that is, and in fact, our course in SPA, which is the oldest, I feel if we have made some minor difference, it is because many of our students go into teaching. They are young people. And that's got me thinking that maybe, what we've done in the specialization and all, we've created silos for ourselves. We have, just, okay, we are only talking about heritage. We are not, I mean, we have to, in a very aggressive manner, not in, how do we mainstream the profession? How do we get into the other things? And we really need to think about that as IHA, as all our courses which we are conducting, because maybe it's a very utopian concept, but I think ultimately conservation has to be seen as an alternate model of development. And here I'll just end with that my professor at York, he told me, and it was a very sort of insightful thing. He said, really, in the day you're out of a job, that'll be when conservation has succeeded. He said, which means everybody would be talking about conservation. You would not need it as a specialized kind of a discipline. That will be the success of conservation, because conservation is a way of life. And we saw that in all our presentations also, because, people were talking about urban conservation, they were talking about urban. I mean, everybody has to start talking about conservation. So I'll just end there. Okay, absolutely last point. That is, again, we are in our session, there was this whole talk about paradigm shift and all. And I think the paradigm shift is that we have to now start talking about ecology and dovetail all our built heritage around ecology, whether we are talking about urban conservation or whether we are talking about buildings, vernacular architecture, which is again was very eco-sensitive, is very eco-sensitive. So at all scales, I think because that is the destiny of the world now. Like if we don't address ecology, the world is ending. So we can keep talking about conserving a building here or conserving a building there. So we have to, that's an opportunity that we should dovetail our whole this conservation debate around ecology. And we can do that at trying to, whether it's not just to do with gardens but cities, buildings, that how are they kind of responding to this whole, resilient design debate.
Oh,
Yeah, I end there.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
On to the way. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Praline. Like in the session, she made my job very simple that I didn't have to repeat a lot of it. But, I will perhaps add to answer to what Parul was saying, what can perhaps be done with the charter. And especially looking at from the presentations that happened in the last session, the 10th session.
Oh,
The one of the points that were raised in that particular session again was that for the need to charter to be a little bit more broad based, not only look at architectural heritage in isolation.
oh,
It should look at landscape and maybe the wider perspective from a conservation from a wider perspective, what perhaps Prilin is calling as ecology. Now, having said that, the charter's been there for a long time, but I think it needs to be more specific too. Right now, the charter is like, it's like again an utopian idea that this is also possible, that's also possible. But I think we need to sort of take a few stands that, from now onwards, what is it that we want, like, from 40 years, if we have not progressed much, though I tend to differ with Praline on that one. The difference, we are sitting here talking about conservation. Yes, maybe in a smaller group, but yes, conservation is being talked about. Yes,
No,
maybe
I
not.
said pace. The pace
Pace.
is
Yeah, yeah,
not.
pace. Yes, we could have done fantastic like many
Yes.
other countries, but yes. So, having said that, maybe how it will chart the trajectory for the next 40 years, you really need to look at. Maybe instead of a charter, do we need more guidelines or what Praline says as a paradigm shift? Now, having said that, from the presentation and from some of my personal experience is that, one of the biggest, maybe I would, maybe a drawback within conservation has been that it is largely based still on sort of passion and for the love of heritage. Do talk about a socioeconomic and many other aspects, but I think solutions still are very design oriented. Even for people who are not into this field, they tend to jump more onto design oriented approach. Maybe we need to look at a more solution based approach where we sort of create convergences between design, economic, social aspects, and maybe also sustainability. Now, for that, we need also to inculcate some bit of scientific approach for quantification. Right now, it's very visual, largely visual, and climatic response maximum, or this tangible, intangible. I think we need to go a little bit more beyond and look at the quantification, like what perhaps the environmental movement have been very successful able to do. And lastly, uh, like how is conservation really also addressing the global challenge? To me, the three main global challenge is climate change, the technology, and ideology. And I feel that if all of these three challenges that we have faced, somehow conservation can provide certain solution, either being subsumed within the dialogue of sustainability or taking the lead towards sustainability. I think that would be what will be hold the future for conservation. Otherwise, unfortunately, in the globalizing world, it will become just another niche sort of field or domain and not sort of the cherry on the cake, as I've been calling, and not the cake itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Divya. Vishakha.
Uh, Thank you. I think INTACH Charter has been there for a long time. When it was formulated, we were very young in the profession. And now, after teaching so many years and um, also teaching in the classes and discussing the INTACH Charter, what has come out is once what was seen as unprotected is also now being discussed to look at it more carefully, because what is many a times termed as unprotected is really where you don't have legal protection. But there are other kind of protections like community trying to protect their assets, or as rightly pointed out, maybe it is a passion driven that is protecting it. So there are various layered protection that is being extended, which we need to look into more carefully. And I think this is where INTACH can play a role model, where it can actually study research on the various kind of protections and bring out the models, which Professor Prioline was also mentioning. So I think in this new coming days, it would be worthwhile to review where we are, because when we were young, we were struggling with awareness as a problem, that people didn't acknowledge there is a heritage and people didn't notice it. But I think there is a good level of awareness in our country, and we have also become what I most of the time says issue identifiers. So we will very quickly come out with ye issue hai, ye issue hai, ye issue hai. But what do we do with the issue? How does issue convert itself into opportunities and challenges? How do we look into what many people would like to define as reimagining, or look at how various kinds of participation has come into play? Because I think we still need to make a huge distinction between stakeholder participation and community participation. We have to understand the difference between urban context and rural context, because we tend to blur these lines very quickly. And holistic understanding, of course, is the key, but then it is also very tricky. So we have to kind of create our balances. In our session, I appreciate the kind of thematic papers that were there, which talked about maybe active sites, strategies, reimagining social behavior, and interrogating the theories and principles. So all these could be a good line of review for the charter, and we should be in a position to take it forward. So one another aspect I would like to mention, which I think our session had, was on social behavior. And we have come to the age where we do not talk about awareness anymore, but really talk about our responses towards the heritage in a more careful manner. Thank you. That was my input.
Thank you, Vishakha. Yeah, next is Louise.
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't able to listen to anything yesterday, and obviously I've only listened to the one session today. So I just want to say thank you, first of all, for myself and York being part of this discussion over the last 2 days as well, because there is that long connection between the two institutions. And of course, we use the INTACH Charter in all of our teaching on our postgraduate programme. So I really like the way in which everything goes full circle in conservation, that we're constantly learning and supporting others in the field. So I think the INTACH Charter is still really important in the way in which it places that balance back towards undesignated heritage. And because of that, it's still extremely relevant, and we still use that all the time. Of course, practices have changed and evolved in the last 20 years. And so it is now much more normalised that is the approach that is used in the UK. And obviously, we learned a huge amount through the INTACH Charter in terms of changing our approaches to thinking broadly about heritage. I do think there is an opportunity to really position the Charter and those discussions about what it's doing next within that broader discussion around global challenges and that fundamental connection that people have with place. And when we start thinking about very local approaches to conservation, when we think about how the sort of local base of economics is so important as well. And I think in an increasingly complex and globalized world, that importance of heritage from a very local point of view is only ever going to become more and more important. That's when we're looking at things like training, that importance of having sites that we can access, but also encouraging people into the sector. Now, that's the communities that we are part of, involved in delivering projects, involved in teaching, but also those communities of craft practitioners as well, and how important it is to have that local knowledge and that local sort of economic multiplier. So I think there's lots of opportunities in revisiting the Charter to think about the global challenge, to think about the local significance, and then also to pick up on that evolving debate around the sort of beyond human world. So that is incorporating everything that is to do with the natural environment, but also those interactions that we have that sometimes we take for granted. So I think the other thing is also to think about about risk and challenge within a context of a very shifted climate as well, and again rooting that back to local adaptation and local needs. So as I was only able to listen to the papers in that one session, I'm going to leave it there, but I am going to listen with great interest to all the other chairs and contributors in this final discussion. So thank you.
Thanks, Louise. Okay, so next we have Yamini. Yes.
Okay, am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Parul. Shurajit and I were the co-chairs for our session, and needless to say, because of our backgrounds, I think we had a lot of very interesting papers that weren't about buildings at all, you know. They covered topics dealing with a lot of ethnographic areas, ethnographic research, powerful practices, complex rituals, and some very interesting and lively occupations, livelihoods. So I would say that, you know, judging from our session, we this area of heritage, particularly aspects of intangible heritage and the practices related with that, is it's an oyster waiting to open. You know, I mean, it has the potential to explore many new areas, cover a lot of new ground, and also not least, create new paradigms in research. For example, we came up with this whole notion of how does one define research sources, because all of us who come from very pedantic academic backgrounds, we are sitting in our little disciplinary silos and saying, okay, sources are all secondary or primary or written, textual, and so on. And then when one is dealing with working with tour guides or working with a performing art like Tayyam, then it is your performers, it is your guides, it is your people who are, interacting and who have their hands deep in the clay of those practices. It is those people who are our sources. And I found that a really fascinating aspect, which in fact Shurajit also pointed out, and then it sort of really hit me over the next half an hour over lunch, to be honest. Also, the contexts are changing. So I think intangible heritage needs to be looked at, definitely maybe more rigorously. I think we need to also, I go back to what Priyalin said, that we only had the abstracts. So we didn't have, for example, reference lists, reading lists. What were the sources, to really come to a conclusion about the rigor of the methodology and the scope and so on. I think it would be nice if we had a little more information. So I asked the members, the presenters, to get in touch with me if they wanted any more feedback on their papers.
Right.
And I think in our section, Molly Kaushal summed it up very well when she said that the so-called heritageization of intangible practices, while on one hand it's critiqued, it's criticized, it's sort of making it, it's ossifying it, it is freezing the element in a way. But on the other hand, it is also prolonging the life of and saving the life of a lot of elements. So yeah, I think that is we are left with these paradoxes and conundrums. But definitely, I think we need to focus a little bit more on the rigor of the research. Which I hope going forward in symposia to come, I hope we'll have more of an idea of how rigorous the research process has been. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have now Surajit.
Thank you. Like Yamini pointed out, it was a pretty exciting set of papers, simply because all three of them were looking at the changes that they're seeing today in a form where there is no kind of tangible element to, kind of center yourself around. So in a situation like that, while it's true that we need to build forms, more rigor, as Yamini pointed out, but more than that, be a little imaginative in the way we see influences acting on things. While it's possible to, think of tangible sites and influences on them, you have to be really far more imaginative to look at how the intangible is affected with the passage of time. And that's where to develop a new kind of methodology of examining transformations in intangible traditions, forms that needs to be kind of looked at, and I hope will be done in the coming years as people kind of explore more and more of ICH in different paradigms. The other thing I also wanted to say is, one of the things that was missing, I don't know how much it came up in the other sessions. I've not attended too many of them, but how your status in society means for the way you perceive something. That's something that actually did not come up too often, and I feel that that is especially nowadays, it's a bit of a elephant in the room, because that's pretty central to the future of heritage. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Surajit. All right. So next we have Professor Murthy, Surendran Murthy.
I don't think that Professor Murthy is in the call.
Join. Okay. Looks like he hasn't been able to join.
Yes.
So we'll move on to the next session, which is
Mr. Pankaj Modi.
Dr. Basu and then Pankaj Modi.
Pankaj can start.
Sure.
Yeah, okay, sure. Thank you. So, Parul, I'll be here a little critical also of this symposium, the way it's organized, and please accept my views wherever possible.
Sure.
So, I mean, if we are really looking at INTACH Charter or Charter for India and how it has performed or how it can be applicable, I think we needed much more wider perspectives. We needed viewpoints from people who have been practicing projects and looking at what were the challenges.
No,
We all
that's
talk about every project like Venice Charter, this charter, that charter. But I think there are various stakeholders today who have been working in conservation, various types of projects which are happening from city levels like, Hriday, JNNURM has happened, and recently smart cities have happened, and pedestrianization projects, intangible heritage, adaptive reuse. There are non-conservation architects who are working on a lot of conservation projects. Does charter matter to them when working on conservation? And if so, what are the challenges or what are the principles or guidelines that are being followed? Or are we all still looking at different approaches? Everyone uses the word authenticity and integrity. I mean, very much like what AGK was speaking about yesterday. But today we need to really have a realistic outlook of how this is being looked at by the people who are practicing these things. Some of the presentations I found are largely, studies or academic, and therefore it wasn't possible to bring out the challenges that the charter brings out or implies when you have to get into the conservation part of it. Yes, at level of studies, documentation, what we need to identify, what are the related aspects also that need to be considered. These have been recognized by many people who have made the presentations. So that one aspect, which of course has to be part of a charter, is being brought out. But I think much more wider viewpoints are required if we have to go ahead.
Absolutely, Pankaj. No, that of course is this is not the only step, certainly, and cannot be. Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So that was my point. I would request Sangamitra ji to.
Sure.
Okay, so I do agree with Pankaj that about the charter. So this is a good that you have taken the charter as the main theme, because this is a high time we should relook into the charter, and that should come from all the. I mean, I am very frank that when I look and do some work, then or also I teach, I do include the INTACH Charter, but if you ask me that which are the charters I refer more, it definitely not the INTACH Charter. But I do mention because it brings out in essence how we should look into the Indian conservation as a whole. That philosophy is there. So it's a high time that in the context of this changing scenario, more development projects, smart city, a lot of things are happening, which are bypassing INTACH, bypassing conservation architects, and so we should have to look into that thing. So what does that mean? That what is coming is that we have shifted from the monumentic centric conservation, everyday conservation. Two issues really come up. One is that how to I mean, I have mentioned also in my session that integrate not integrated urban development conservation or something. I'm talking about what some say conservation-led development, or where the conservation becomes the keyhole. And when we say that, it should be not for the big projects, but it should be everyday conservation, which really makes up the identity of a city or places. And how do they look into that? Just making enlisting and documentation, this is important, but it's not sufficient. How do you actually implement that? So two things again, the legal and the economic, the incentives. TDR hasn't really worked much. So what are the way to tell the people, know that if you take conserve your structure or house which you have inherited, is really going to be a positive thing for you. I know the big cities, they are just demolishing the heritage because either they cannot maintain it, or there are legal hurdles, or there is no need to it, tenancy, lot of problem. But why should I be penalized, that they say that because I've inherited something which is of a heritage value? I don't know. I can't maintain that. Government is not doing anything. Will you be doing anything? Every day in the Kolkata Municipal Corporation, we hear about that. So that is not, should not be only for the responsibility of the conservation or INTACH. It should be taken as a national level. And the conservation, again, still, even after so many years, is taken by the others as a beautification project. Is just externally, not going into the essence, which is really the primary thing of the INTACH Charter, that the holistic and other things. So take that, the philosophy and essence of that, to the practical level. What should be guideline, key points, and other thing in the present context? I think this is a task which I think all the practicing and the other things can contribute to. And also in our session, another thing has come up, that the rural areas, the hilly areas and other, where we see that homestays are being talked about, the tourism which is talked about, which is ultimately going against the conservation. So there was a case study which really talked about the sustainable development, and also looking into the other side of conservation or community, and also the training and capacity building. I did mention that for institutes which have been identified at the by the central government as the integrating the planning and the conservation, or look into the thing, that capacity building at all level, not only for the people who are practicing, but the people who are the corporation and other things. They don't just understand that what is the conservation, how it can benefit the people. So capacity building for the people, community, officials and other thing, which INTACH is doing to a certain extent, but also these key institutes which have been roped in for the capacity building at all level, that really can change and make a change. So one is the legal, one is the financial incentive part, not only TDR and other thing at the apex level, the how the taxation and other thing can affect. CSR, I know sometimes it goes again. So these are the major points which I think, but I do appreciate that and the impact assessment, heritage impact. Somebody mentioned that the environmental impact assessment has really been improved and now become I'm not saying everywhere is successful, but it has a format. So heritage impact assessment we do, but still we haven't been able to rationalize. So rational scientific method, which is another extension of that. We had a paper which is looking into the various tools and techniques to look into and the local area planning and how that can be more rationally, because everywhere we every time listen, you are being emotional, you are dreaming and other things. So how I actually look like that there is a justification, there is a rationale behind the conservation. So these are the things we should review or relook into the INTACH Charter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Dr. Niyati Jigyasu. Yes.
So thank you, Parul, for inviting me in this very interesting sessions. And I think the people before me have been, major stalwarts. So they already talked about a lot of things which have been part of the learning for me also. I would just like to say very few things, and especially coming from the place I come from and also from the sessions that we had. So I do agree with what Professor Pralin started with, that there are major case studies which were documentation, which I do agree that, because being a lot of people are academics and they do have a lot of, and that is important also. Definitely that is part of it. But what happens is, in that entire documentation, there's only one last slide which actually talks about strategies or anything, and then it doesn't get into implementation level. So what Professor Vishakha talked about, that how these issues, they can actually become challenges or opportunities, we don't land up at that level. It more becomes only about the issues, which somehow we have been now starting to see that they're common across the region and across the place, where we are looking at. Two things which came up in my this thing was, one was about one paper which was very interesting. The reason being that it actually talked about so many government schemes, and it talked about what the scheme did and this and that and a lot of things it talked about. But there also at the end, in only one line, the person was able to say that maybe the things would come out in the paper. But there she was able to say that, it did not still work with the people. But now, why it did not work, that is one question. So next, if we can actually look at a seminar or a symposium or some studies where actually you look at the impact of all these, because now there are a lot of schemes. Government is actually going all way out to do a lot of things at every levels. So if we can actually see the impact of that, and if anybody has done actually impact studies on that, it would be very interesting to see that, how these roll out and whether they should be really they do work or not. And if they work, then how do they work? Because even with Jandala Guru, I think Yamini would be knowing that, when we just getting the ICH tag, which also takes such a long time and it's such a complex process. But ultimately, I don't know how much the community benefits from it ultimately. And then a lot of other interventions did come in at that place also. So how does all these things, and in the same session, we had one more person who talked about GI tag. So this GI tag is also something which has become more like a brand today. So, and does it just remain a brand? And if it remains a brand, then what about the artisans who are not at the level of, that savvy with technology and either education everywhere? So how does it actually play out for them? Or does it really help or, make any difference to them? And last point, which, because the place I come from, I thought that, even today, whenever these documentation case studies, they normally, if they are coming from the ICH side, maybe because also because of the person who is actually presenting it and where he's or she's coming from, it actually remains basically the ICH, the talk that has been going on since, ICH and tangible coming together, the interrelationships, that doesn't come out very strongly. So maybe that was very important, that, how the linkage of intangible within the built landscape, how does that come out, should be very strong. Maybe it was because the person who actually presented are historians and, they are from different fields. So, and when you are from architecture, then you make the built more important and the rest comes around it. So somewhere, there that can actually be re-looked at. But yeah, these were just some of my observations. Thank you. But it was definitely very interesting to see the narratives coming from different people, from the different disciplines. So I think that way this symposium definitely helped to, bring everybody coming together at one platform. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Kaushal. Yeah. You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, hello to everyone first, and I think I learned a lot more from the conversations that are happening here. I would agree with some of the speakers that, well, the session that I was chairing had less to do with the really built heritage or conservation or INTACH Charter, but I would have liked that focus to be there because all these attempts were at safeguarding in many ways, the tangible and intangible were like coming together. For me personally, I think I had a lot to learn from the INTACH Charter, and I also liked the way the intangible heritage elements were brought in, the whole idea of a holistic approach. Uh, but I also agree with one of the previous, I think, Pankaj, talking about that. What impact did it leave in terms of, when they involve the professionalism, the technical aspects, the government policies or the government schemes, and they're doing Hriday, they're doing Prasad, and having made heritage at the center of all the development debates today, where is that holistic approach? And first of all, I think the whole idea of what is heritage, what is to be protected, and again, the speakers here have spoken about this whole thing of either the grandiosity of structures, the spectacle aspect of a performance, is or the economy of the product ultimately, and which brings in tourism, commercialism, and different kind of industries into play. Firstly, do they really understand what this holistic approach is? Are there their targets, their goals, their objectives, have synergies between them? It doesn't seem, beyond when we see what actually the ground realities are. And in that case, I found this GI tag, there was a very interesting presentation on this GI tag, and the scholar is, I think, still grappling with this whole idea. And here, I think, Shurajit, I think you said about the social order, the marginality of the whole. On one way, the practitioners and also the practices, at what margins they are. Then, what is the actual socio-cultural political landscape of this? Because when you're talking about landscapes, cultural landscapes, I think this element still remains very much outside. And being a caste society as we are, being, the whole social orders kind of including their professions falling within certain hierarchies, these issues become important. And then when I bring it back to GI tag, I agree that, it's become a brand, but it's not just a brand, because what is happening is that it is also begin to create fissures between the practicing community. Some people have access to it, they are more tech savvy, they are invited by Sangeet Natak Academy more, or maybe with IGNC more, or all these urban platforms where they have access to the bureaucrats, they have access to the larger professional groups, more market friendly approaches that they learn about, and they create a niche for themselves within the village. There's a very interesting story. One is very well known about the Odisha shadow puppet. I'm not going there, but I'm talking about anonymous incident, because I don't want to take names. Is that the moment this GI tag happens or a mastercraft person thing happens? Now, there was this incident in the village where the mastercraft person actually befriended the postman of the village, and all letters to the craft person in that area coming to would be intercepted by. So, the complexities are many more. So when we are talking about, safeguarding, we're talking about GIT tags, we're talking about mastercraft person, are we looking at the disparities that exist within this entire socio-political cultural landscape in which these practices are really thriving? So there are questions that we need to ask, because within our holistic approach, we still kind of fall back into very straight-jacketed ideas of documentation, of conservation, still have our silos and, our own islands, and the tangible would be looked in a particular way. The funding would go in a particular way to a to a structure, then it would go to probably a singer. So how does INTACH Charter in future sees its role in bridging these gaps then becomes very, very important. Another thing I also felt in the session that unfortunately I couldn't attend yesterday's sessions because I was preoccupied elsewhere the whole day, and I seriously regretted it because there's so much that probably happened here that would have given me, food for thought, and also take it back to my students. And I regret that immensely. But having said that, what I gained from the presentation that I did attend today is that, the scholars chosen for each session, for example, were talking about things that had nothing to do with the previous one or the one that would follow. Broadly, maybe they were put in a framework, I agree. But say, for example, I had this very interesting study of Palathur village. Now, if there was something on cultural landscapes, or there was something like, climate change, ecology, I think the relevance of this presentation from a historical point of view would have been larger, and would have also challenged the scholar to work more on the content in a different context than in session like this. So it became like an ethnographic description, documentation. The first one with the heritage education was very fascinating. I think that a lot of effort had gone by Madhu Watri and Pranavi Vasa, what they're doing at the school level, at the college level. But again, what happened is that, within that limited 10-minute space, they are talking about what they are doing. But the rigorness of it, the impact assessment of it, how do they relate this whole taking out, say, for example, students to a heritage site? How do they link it with the larger and the broader stories of conservation or safeguarding of the communities? And I'm sure they're doing it, but the time and the space probably doesn't allow them to do it. So yes, I think there's a lot that we can do. And there's a lot that is there in the INTACH Charter, but yes, revisiting it and making it forceful to give it some teeth that impacts the governments, who are making all kind of heritage corridors today. So somebody talked about the ideology, there's politics, there is administrative wrangling, there is bureaucracy. So why do these projects fail? Or even if they achieve something, why does it leave a big part of the community? And that also brings us to the whole question of what is community participation, what is community consent? Have we really worked on it? Do we have a framework? Or these have now purely become, accepted terminologies to be used? So these are some of the questions that I ponder over, and I leave it for the platform today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me and accommodating.
Thank you. No, absolutely. Actually, there are so many questions around this that it's very hard to bring it all in these 2 days and in this 1 hour discussion, of course. But it's just a beginning, and we hope to take that forward in various ways. Next, we have Arun is, so we have Neeti Trivedi. Yes. Neeti and...
Good afternoon, everyone. So I just have a few points noted here, which I think the stalwarts have already discussed. So it'll be just my bit of contribution here. So what I felt was through the sessions that I had attended and I chaired as well, the sessions in the symposium mostly demonstrated a comprehensive approach, by bridging the gap between tangible and intangible heritage, and they were emphasizing on their interdependencies, which were very clear in terms of how do we conserve all these culturally significant places. So that is what I felt. That was something, the first point that I felt, that we need to understand these interdependencies. We need to look at it, meticulously. Then I also felt that, through the presentations, we have collected, or we have plethora of data available. We have documented so much, we have mapped so much, we have so much work with us. Even Menon sir mentioned about, in his opening session, he mentioned about Ekam Kshetra, which was again presented. And it felt like, what are we doing with this data? Or how do we go ahead with this data that is already available with us? Then I also felt that, coming from academics background, I also felt that maybe we need to revisit the curriculum, or maybe we need to revisit the syllabus, and we need to see how these courses are related. How do we bring in, cross cultural or cross disciplinary dialogues together, wherein we can bring in these different people and encourage in these discourses, wherein, all these gaps that was mentioned yesterday can be filled in with these different discourses. Also, I felt that, there was, even though there was just so many presentations happening, students were presenting excellent work that they had with them, but maybe because of the time limitation, it could have happened. It felt like, there was no outcome to it. There was data, but what are we doing with this data? Who is it impacting? Where are we taking this data ahead? Or is it just a documentation that we are taking ahead? We were not clear in terms of how do we interpret that data when we analyze it. It was not clear as in how do we measure that data. So when it comes to intangible, I think we also discussed this in one of our sessions. When it is intangible, we are not clear how do we measure it. So maybe that could be something that we need to discuss and take it ahead. Secondly, I also felt that, Parul, maybe we should have, we could have had our first session where we can incorporate or highlight the evolution of conservation practices, or, tracing back the evolution of INTACH Charter. So maybe that could be a first session where everyone could have attended, and, listening from everyone, that would have helped. Or how the students or the researchers are interpreting the charter. That could have been our first session under various themes, if we have. And we can also check in, if we have these case studies. Following sessions could be where case studies demonstrating the charter, influenced by charter, or practices using these charters in their projects, could have been presented, where we can, of course, these will be under different context. It could have been all over India that they have been practiced. So this could have been a repository for us, where different successful case studies are presented, and then we can use these case studies or this repository to formulate formulate guidelines for, and take it ahead in terms of how do we take ahead this charter. So this charter has to, come up to something. So maybe that could be the second step, where we create guidelines for the coming generation. And lastly, of course, I have already mentioned that maybe we can integrate, or, encourage more interdisciplinary speakers from various backgrounds. Could be archaeology, architecture, of course we have, urban planners we could have also involved, environmental scientists, or, people coming from economics background. So Indology. So if we have this, the big group of people coming together, the gaps could be easily filled. Thank you.
Thank you. And add to the confusion also.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so Dr. Shikha Jain, yeah.
Thanks, Parul. So it's really nice to be, present with all of you. I mean, all the colleagues that we worked together with for so many years, and also all the fresh minds that were there, yesterday for the presentations. I particularly enjoyed the session that I co-chaired with Niti, because I think, development versus conservation, that is something, very critical at present. And the theme that was selected is very, very relevant for us to delve on. Priyaleen has already mentioned about this impressive presentation. I think that was also the highlight for me. I was really impressed with those two boys, Sayam and Johan, and how they developed the methodology for cultural resilience in two different case studies. It was really fantastic. So I'm glad that I was part of the session. And I think Dr. Sangamitra Vasu has already mentioned the issues that our cities are facing, with all these demolitions. So they were very important points raised in this session. I feel, of course, I mean, we are always debating on, how we should do interventions, whether it's within historic cities, in the historic urban cores, or even in cities which are extending. So in the newer areas, how to establish a cultural identity. And that particular presentation really sort of addressed this key issue. But it also raised certain points, and which I mentioned, like the grading system that we've been using for years and years, and it is also part of the charter. So probably we really need to review whether that grading system is worth following, whether we need some new systems, or how do we look at in the current scenario. So many chairs have mentioned about the climate change, about the ecological issue, cultural landscapes. Dr. Molly Kaushal used the term, and of course it's been so many years, but I don't see INTACH actually, even defining cultural landscape, which is so important for India. I mean, we can understand that ASA and state cannot recognize it as a category, but why not INTACH? So I think all these aspects, using alternate conservation as an alternate model for development, as mentioned by Dr. Priyalin, is very relevant. And I feel in overall, in terms of looking at the charter, I think we need to move on. It's currently very architecture oriented. We need to move on to urban. We need to move on from its monument kind of approach or architecture kind of approach to a cultural landscape approach, looking at ecology also. And overall, I think the conservation has moved from a value-based approach to a people-centric approach, which we are not addressing. Of course, I mean, all the grading and all is still value-based. So how do we merge that? And how, it's not to say that values don't matter now, but definitely the people-centric approach is what is being practiced more today. So we really need to look at the charter while revising how we integrate all this. And lastly, even the indigenous component in the charter, how do we, there were other presentations like the one with Dr. Menon on the IRD. I mean, there are, since last 20 years, we've really evolved in our understanding of the indigenous knowledge system. So how do we integrate that into the charter today? I think these are my few points that I noted down, which could probably help in the revision of the charter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think yesterday also you brought in the optimism through your comment that no, it's not irrelevant. We use it. So great. I think we all need that. I'll now move on to the next, which is, so we have Arun is not here, but Gurmeet Mr. Gurmeet Rai will be representing, I think, both the views from both the chairs. Yeah, thanks.
So thank you very much, Parul, for inviting me to the forum. In fact, I was just thinking that there are several platforms of webinars and conferences that happen, but INTACH always feels like homecoming. So, and that itself is kind of important because I think all of us, I mean, the genesis of, the beginning of the conservation practice among the architects, INTACH was the land of our birth, so this is kind of, and I'm saying it in a particular context, and I'll take that forward in my next point. As a conservation architect, it's a point that I made even yesterday was about the language of the practice. As architects, as our practice has grown from looking at buildings to buildings and people to buildings and context, from tourism to urban conservation. We see government also moving from, from Ministry of Culture to Ministry of Tourism to Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. We can see that trajectory in so many years. And we talk about people's engagement, we talk about rights-based approaches, but we are still architects and people from the profession. My question really would be that our language of the practice, to a very, very fundamental thing, that what is the language of our practice? Now, when we talk about the Venice Charter, which was being discussed yesterday, what gave the vocabulary, we say, okay, it's Eurocentric. Now, I think just to say it's Eurocentric or it's on the West and all, I think it's not enough, because it's not about throwing the baby with the bathwater. Was a fundamental step in our understanding the practice. I mean, the World War I, the Hague Convention, this whole evolution of the knowledge of the world in heritage practice cannot just be, we cannot just, reject it and start doing a value judgment there. The point here is that there was a certain context worldwide which led to the creation of those charters. We have a different context. And the context is, we all work in different contexts. We know there's no universe. We are talking about multiverses here. The regions in which we work, the communities have a particular language, the way they understand, or the way we understand and we communicate, the way they understand and they communicate. Now, very recently, I'd like to demonstrate this point, that I was asked by the diaspora people in the UK, Sikhs in the UK, that what is the difference between Sikh heritage and Sikh architecture? And I was quite flabbergasted. They have a much better grip on the Sikh literature, on Sikh history, on Sikh religious practices than even I have, being in India. So, to reject a West-based voices is, I think, is a folly. Now, when I started describing it to them, I realized Sikh architecture is all material. There are certain principles we talk about, but within the realm of, if I had to explain it very simply to them, within the realm of the conservation space. But when I spoke about Sikh heritage, the material and the non-material came together. And they've registered a body called Virasati Asthan Seva Charitable Organization. How more international, global can you get? They found a local word for the heritage, which is Virasat. Asthan in Sanskrit, the Sufis use the word Asthan. We use in Punjab use the word Asthan. Probably Sthan is used in the broader, I would say the Indic languages. Virasati Asthan Seva. Now, Seva is a practice by which you offer yourself to take care of a site which is, larger than your material, whatever world. They call their organization Virasati Asthan Seva, charitable organization. They felt the need of using the word charitable. Now, this brought out a fundamental thing for me, which is, where is the language of our practice? That have we developed a language of our practice? We're talking about conservation, restoration, preservation, and sustainable development. We're having, without looking in our own backyard, that what is the common vocabulary that we can use with people across the board. Now, the second part of the story is social justice. We talk about community as a homogeneous blob. This is a point I made to even Madhura and Ananya's work, and I love their work. And for the sake of making their experience accessible to all of us sitting in Delhi, she called it community and the community. And then she clarified. She said, I meant community from that they all have the practice of that particular skill. But our communities, we are dealing with caste, class, and whole lot of disruptive, anti-human rights contexts. Unless we as heritage practitioners become comfortable in working in the space of, Yamini would be able to give better word for that, in the social space, unless we can speak about it with comfort and deal with it, heritage is going to continue to be on the periphery. Like somebody said that why is ecology more part of, the environment space is far more engaging for communities than the cultural space, because we don't speak the same language. And we want to further inform ourselves. And I'm not talking about the skills, the scientific skills that are necessary for heritage practice. That is a given. I'm talking about moving forward. INTACH, having been there for 40 years, stand in the year, suppose we were to imagine that we are standing in the year 2034 today, and we're looking back, what would we like to achieve? And would our tools and our language of practice continue to be what it is till what it has been in the last 40 years? Obviously, we'll be on the same treadmill, like Priyaleen was saying, that we are exactly where we were 40 years ago. We will be there because we are rehashing the language that we have picked up while we are standing there and we are being critical of the Western, Europe-centric. I love the Venice Charter. When I feel like using Venice, I use Venice. When I feel like using Florence, I use Florence. When I feel like using INTACH Charter, I'll use that. Whatever, in the context I work, if I'm talking about Sikh heritage, to be able to communicate what I'm trying to do, I have this entire vocabulary to work with. So I will not spend time rehashing what I have as my tools. I would like to enhance my understanding and create platforms for inclusion by specific actions, so that in the year 2034, where do I want to see the practice? Do we want everybody to, like Priyaleen said, what her mentor, her professor said, that how can we remove ourselves from that being these specialists, and it becomes a language of our landscape. The second part, so social justice and the language, the vocabulary, the lexicon, I'm leaving up to people like, our people like Yamini and all to kind of, the people in the liberal arts space to actually help us move in that direction. The other is about charters. INTACH Charter, yesterday I quickly looked at it because I'm not in the space of teaching. So I'm not, I still have to look for them when I have to make reference to them. What came to my mind was that I thought it was probably too early for its time. They were talking about education. They were talking about ethics of a conservation practitioner. And we started talking about, we were very concerned. So it is a point in time where the charter was relevant. Obviously, the conservation practice, the ethics of practice has to be held. We know how compromised it is in the field, just to demonstrate the point out there. And why we say it's compromise is not because I'm not questioning the integrity of people. I'm questioning the system that people are responding to. Our demands from the policymakers is such that people are kind of negotiating the space that they are trying to exist in. We've normalized all of that nonsense also now, and that's what all has got normalized worldwide, we all know. But between the charter, the heritage and democracy recommendations, I forget what it was called, when ICOMOS, when we had the General Assembly here in 2017, the heritage and democracy recommendations got drafted. A certain worldview, we had the international practitioners with us, and therefore a certain aspect came out of India, which is heritage and democracy. And we also have cultural heritage policy by ASI. These are 3 documents of 3 different institutions saying something in a particular given time and space. So we need to understand what led to their creation. And therefore, what have they informed? The practice or policy? Practice maybe, policy I'm not too sure, but people like Vishakha and all will be able to say more about it because they've spent time looking at legal frameworks and so on. Within the policy space, we have private sector, we have people, we have planning, and we have private sector. And why I've made private sector come out, because in the last 10 years, we've seen private sector all over the place. And therefore, for various reasons, so patronage, all of that needs to be looked within the policy framework. So we need to look at these charters and we need to look at the practice and policy framework. And To end it all, I would just say that starting of INTACH in 1984, I would say the truth does not change, only the awareness of it does. So I think that's a space I stand in, which is I think I would really say that what has been created has been created. Where we need to stand now is into the future and looking back at what we want to bridge and where do we want to go from here. Yeah. And I would like to compliment you for this wonderful platform you've created, and more power to you. Please continue this platform. INTACH, this is I would say breath of fresh air in INTACH, because several of us had become cynical that INTACH's not creating these platforms for dialogue. And I think kudos to you. And also moving forward, look forward to more of such platforms in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Gurmeet. So, yeah, I think I think this is where, like what Pankaj said, that, the practitioners, and what like Neeti said, that sessions on the charter and impact on the charter. I think that's the step that the practitioners need to be willing to take also, because what I feel really in practice is that people in general are not with their practices, they're too busy doing that. So it's just, that is what is happening, So it's about how we bring this whole question of debating this from the practice end, which has to be cracked now, certainly. And you guys should guide us how to go ahead with that. So I'll move on to the next speakers, which is I think the last panelists that we have, Shahul and Madhura. Yeah.
I don't think we have Shahul and Madhura online.
Okay. All right. So then I think I'll just Nirupama had sent a few pointers. One I did paste, but it's too long. So essentially, I think the focus of her, the points that she sent across were that bringing in local communities and traditional custodians are crucial considerations for sites of value. And I'm just summarizing, and identifying and cultural mapping is the first step, with a participatory approach and involvement of local communities. And especially in the context of culturally sacred spaces, where the renewal, repair, and their evolving nature is central to their relevance. And so the custodians and the conservation professionals hence may have a different perspective also in such kind of spaces. And because the priorities may be different when from the pure conservation perspective, somebody's looking at cultural heritage, which is sacred, versus the communities. And then she talks about how the charter must acknowledge the role of traditional knowledge in conservation and old tradition of renewal, and how it has to be done in practice is to be considered, essentially. And repair and renewal may be in practice for more years than the specified 100 years. How do we incorporate these traditional management practices into our conservation activities? And she specifically talks about the Ayadhi Ganitam and reverse engineering as an example of bridging the modern conservation principle and TKS, gap, bridging the two, basically. And she talks about acknowledging that what constitutes heritage is also related to intangible beliefs and practices, and not just for buildings, but for natural features and elements that the local communities hold sacred. And all the associations, lores, and myths and everything has to be considered, and involvement of local communities in mapping process and decision-making both. And I think, of course, she also brings in how building landscape paper and suggests to look at maritime trade as a cultural landscape, and which, as per her, is an innovative approach. And this kind of an approach would take the study beyond the physical and tangible entities into intangibles of practices and an entire network of knowledge and ideas exchange, emphasizing the interconnected nature of cultural landscapes. So I think many of you already have brought these points out about the connection between nature, culture, intangible, tangible. And I think that's something that we've all been talking about for the last 40 years, maybe. And I think a lot of these views, with some cynicism that came through today also, and yesterday also, were was sort of a result of this question of this, I think, sense of urgency that we feel about moving forward from that conversation to actually making a change, maybe, and actually seeing tangible things on the ground, I suppose. So it's been really lovely. I think we've managed a lot in this short time, and having received so many views, so many inputs, so many ways of moving forward, and a lot of confusion, of course, as well, because it's obviously going to be it's not a straight line that we are walking, and it's not a path that has been charted for any of us. But thank you again for giving your time, and I'm absolutely positive that this cannot be the end, and this is not even the beginning, really. I mean, it's just the tip of the iceberg. But I'm really, really happy that we got to hear from each of you. This platform, like many of you mentioned, has been very enriching. And I think it's the spirit of uh, maybe, helping each other build a new idea, narrative. I mean, not narrative really, but building new ideas of how to take things forward is what we can provide as at least the academy. And I certainly hope to rope you in for many such, events in the future, where we can discuss further and thrash out these ideas more pinpointedly and more specifically than we did today, because of course it was a huge discussion about the idea of conserving culturally significant places in India, which is really huge and which cannot be really tied up with a neat bow at all. So thank you very much again, and I think we'll leave it here and look forward to more such discussions. Thank you very much.
Can we have a group photo if everybody can just switch on their cameras?
Thank you, Parul, for this wonderful symposium.
Yeah.
Thank you, Parul.
Thanks.
And your team. Thank you so much.
Yes, my team, absolutely. Yeah. I think they've been really, really on top of everything. Dr. Riya Gupta, I must thank her in specific. I've been in touch with each of you, and I know you've been hounded by mails coming from her, morning, evening, night. She's really been at it. So big congratulations to her, and big thank you. And and the rest of the team, all of them have pitched in to make this happen, and can't thank them enough. Starting with the youngest member, Mehul, who just joined us recently, to Anshika, to Tavishi, Parul, and Jaya and Shruti, who were yesterday at the back end of everything, and Prasanna as well. So it's been really lovely, and thank you very much, all the participants. Without you, of course, we couldn't have done it. So thanks.
Thank you, everyone. So I would like to end the meeting here.
I think you should do a 1, 2, 3 now, so that we know when you're clicking the picture.
Okay, okay. Let's all switch on the cameras once. Okay, some of the cameras are still off. Sorry. Okay, 1, 2, 3. One more. One more. Wait, 1, 2, and 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.